And good afternoon, everyone. Once again, my name is Franklin. I'm one of the two co-founders of the Northern California Spinal Cord Injury Foundation, also known as NorCal SCI. Welcome to this afternoon's presentation on No More Knots. It's part two of Rachel's demonstration of back and hip self-release techniques for those with spinal cord injuries. These presentations are now made possible thanks to our generous donors. We exhausted our ReFoundation grant last month, and so again, thanks to our donors, we're now able to continue with these presentations for an indefinite basis. So grateful for them for that. And also we're thankful that you're able to join us. So just a heads up, here in California, it's over 100 degrees and we've been given all sorts of alerts about potential power outages. We certainly, at least Rachel and I are hopeful that the power is going to hang on for the entire hour of the presentation. So crossing fingers. Anyhow, so just a few housekeeping items. As usual, everyone has been muted in order to eliminate background distractions. That's why you're not hearing any noises other than myself and Rachel that'll be talking. However, I am sure some of you may have some questions throughout the presentation. So hold on to them and feed them to me through the chat feature on your Zoom screen. And we will have a Q&A session at the end of Rachel's class. And we'll make sure that all of your questions get answered. And then finally, we are recording this presentation just like we have with all the other ones. And that way, if any of you need to jump off the call or those that were not able to join, we'll send a recording of tonight's presentation to everyone. It'll be in your email inbox as first thing tomorrow morning. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. Then I just want to quickly introduce Rachel. Again, this is part two of our presentation. Last month, she did the first workshop that involved more of upper extremity sort of self-release techniques, shoulders, neck, torso, and trunk. So tonight it's going to be more of a lower extremity. So Rachel is a nationally certified Pilates teacher, certified strength and conditioning specialist, and a movement teacher specializing in working with people with neurological deficits, especially spinal cord injuries. And I am just thrilled to announce that she was just recently certified as a massage therapist and is licensed officially. So congratulations on that, Rachel. Welcome and take it away.
Awesome, thank you. All righty. As always, it's good to see you all. I love these workshops so much because we get to really dive into more of the educational content as opposed to just teaching a class, which is what I spend a lot of my time doing. So a shout out to Franklin and NorCal SCI for continuing to sponsor these. And let's dive in. All right, give me just a moment here to share my PowerPoint. Okay. Alrighty, so yes, as Franklin mentioned, this is part two. If you're joining today and you weren't able to watch part one of the self-release techniques, no worries. This is still, I'm going to do kind of a quick review in the beginning before we jump into things. But I highly recommend that you go back and watch that session because I create the foundation for why self-release techniques are so important, how they help, how to do them, kinds of release tools that you can use. Whereas today I'm just going to be moving a little bit quicker through that so we can get into more of the movement. And then also as a reminder for these workshops, to really listen to your own body. So if you've got aches and pains or neurological pain or prior injuries, take it slow with this stuff. My saying, especially when it comes to self-release work, less is always more. I'm just going to say that one more time. Less is always more. We have this really old-fashioned belief that when it comes to massage or the phrase deep tissue work, which I kind of hate, that it's got to be like, yeah, knuckle into my soft tissue to make change, when really it's the exact opposite. Slow tissue, slow changes. So listen to your body, less is more. For those of you that have hardware, especially if you've got hardware through thoracic or lumbar area, to be really, really mindful of those areas, to maybe stay further away from your midline so we're not we're not right on that hardware, obviously. And then I also just want to say, for folks out there that possibly have cysts on their spinal cord, whether that's cervical or thoracic or lumbar. I actually have two clients right now that have that, so I just wanted to mention it because I know it's out there, I know it's present, and we think that cysts are this like pliable sac that we can again beat up a little bit, but just taking it easy with that. All right. So a couple of self-release reminders. These are all from the first session. So healing requires a calm nervous system. If you're going into any of this kind of work, whether it's self-release or it's movement based, and your system is on overdrive, and most of our systems are in overdrive these days. We are still amidst a global pandemic. Life is stressful, rushing from one thing to another. There's a lot of reasons why our nervous systems are heightened and why they have been heightened even pre pandemic. So, before you're doing this kind of work, just making sure that you're settling into the body. I'm going to give you a couple of ways to settle into the body by starting with a body scan, doing some introductory movements, shoulder rotation, thoracic rotation, neck movements, just to help you settle into your body, but more specifically, calm your nervous system because your tissues and your nervous system aren't going to be receptive to movement and this kind of self release work if you're in that heightened state, that fight and flight nervous system. Right. So the fight and flight is what we call that sympathetic nervous system. And we're trying to calm the body and bring you to what we call your parasympathetic nervous system, which is that rest and digest branch of the nervous system. So the more that we can do that, the more receptive the body is going to be to this kind of work. So what are you looking for when you're doing these self-release techniques? You're looking for, I like to call them sticky areas. They can be tender, they can be maybe even a little uncomfortable. There might even be a little bit of pain in there. They can be just restricted areas like, gosh, the area on the top of my shoulders feels like there's a rock in there. So you're looking for those kinds of areas. We're applying a minimal amount of basically minimal effective pressure where again we're not trying to beat up the tissues, we're just trying to make slow changes over time. Yeah, and then perhaps most importantly, or the overarching theme of this is that these self-release techniques first help calm the nervous system, and then they help create more space in the body. Space in the body can look like a lot of different things. It can look like a greater range of motion for your bones. It can look like being able to finally lengthen out a certain area of muscles or connective tissue, whether that's with rotation or shoulder mobility or whatever that might be. And then remember, we have so many kinds of fluids in the body. We've got blood, we've got lymph, we've got something called interstitial fluid, which is that lubricating fluid uh, in between and around surrounding our muscles and in between and around our connective tissue. So we want those we want those fluids to be present, and we want those fluids to be pumping in whatever direction they're supposed to be pumping. So you might hear me say today, um, you might hear me talk about dehydrated and hydrated areas. I'm not talking about drinking water or anything, or eating more bananas or something like that to help balance your hydration. I'm talking about your actual tissues. So when we're talking about dehydrated tissues, we're talking about tissues that are stiff, are restricted, kind of like I mentioned here. They're tender, they're sticky, and there's not much fluid or movement in those areas. So basically, what do we want to do with those areas? We can introduce some really soft, gentle self release, and then we want to integrate that self release and we want to bring movement into there. There's a saying, motion is lotion, and that definitely applies for this. And that last bottom part of that sentence, when I say we're doing all of this, we're creating space in order to enhance connection. What is connection? So, connection is the body's ability either through the nervous system, so through your spinal cord and your nerves, or through the connective tissue network that we have throughout our entire bodies. So using those two networks, we're trying to reestablish connections that you might have lost after your spinal cord injury. So let's say that you've got a cervical spinal cord injury and you can connect to most of the muscles in your arms, but you're kind of having a hard time connecting to some of your abdominal muscles and especially your hip muscles. So what kinds of self-release can we do to open up those areas? Maybe it's really helpful for you to do mid-back or belly releases. Maybe it's helpful for you to do low back and hip releases, which is what we're going to be going over today. So we're trying to basically, you can think about it as if you're on the freeway and there's a traffic jam, we can go around the traffic jam using side roads. That's kind of what we're doing with this whole connective tissue network. We're trying to open it up. We're trying to create more space so that we can make those connections through the connective tissue, which is highly, highly innervated with nerves as well, as opposed to maybe trying to go through the spinal cord, directly. Mm, there we go. Okay. Okay. So why do self-release for the back, specifically for the back? So back releases can help with a lot of things, and I'm just going to click through these so you can see these. First off, it helps mobilize the spine. If we have a really stiff back, that's going to affect our vertebra, which is the bones in our spine that stack on top of each other. If that part of us is stiff, how are we supposed to bend over to pick something up off of the floor? How are we supposed to look behind us when someone's talking to us? How are we supposed to bend forward to lift our chest? Okay, so overall, spinal mobility is really important, and doing these self release techniques can help release some of those sticky areas to allow for more spinal mobility. Shoulder mobility. A lot of us think of shoulders as these parts of our arms that sit right on top, kind of right on top of our body. Um, the shoulder complex actually starts in our upper back. And you can see in this photo, it really starts with the shoulder blade and it starts with the clavicle. That's kind of where it originates from. It's like the beginning of our wings. So I'm going to show you some self-release techniques today that not only go down your upper, mid, and lower back, but also outline that shoulder blade area because we have a lot of muscles and connective tissue in that area that can get really sticky and can create some of the lack of mobility problems that we often see when there's a lack of range of motion in the shoulder joint. So we're going to be focusing that, but more on the back side of the body today, whereas last time we really were focusing more on the shoulder and the chest, but in the front of the body. Breathing. So these kinds of self-release techniques can really help with breathing. So our heart and our lungs sit in the upper part of our chest. That's what our rib cage is protecting. Our rib cage is there to really protect those two very important structures. The lungs, so we have something called the viscera, which is just basically a very, very fine layer that covers your lungs and then double covers the lungs and connects to some of the muscles in the back of your body. I'm going to show you all of this on an anatomy app, or this three-dimensional anatomy app in a moment here. But this is all to say that when we can affect the superficial and the deep muscles in between the ribs and along the spine where our lungs are located, so kind of right in this mid-back area, when we can affect those through self-release, it can actually really create quite a bit more space for our lungs to breathe into our back. So we're going to do a check-in today where you're focusing on your breath, and then we're going to do a check-in after and see if the release techniques helped with your breath at all. Oh yeah, I skipped over that back pain. This is more of an obvious one. For those of you that have low back, mid back, upper back pain, giving a bit of love and attention to that area can help release some of that. And then organ health. You've heard me talk about this a lot in our other workshops about how how our organ health can play a really big role in the overall health of the body and actually back pain as well. So when we're working on self-release techniques, really targeting more in the lower back, because that's the area that hugs the organs around to the front, um, we're affecting those organs, we're moving those organs. We've got our kidneys that sit right in our lower back. And again, we don't want to beat those kidneys up, but bringing a little bit of self-release into that area can help mobilize the kidneys if they're getting stuck. And by stuck, I mean quite literally. When we don't, just like our muscles and our connective tissue, when we aren't being mindful about bringing some kind of movement and self-release into our belly area where all of our organs sit, our organs can actually start to adhere together and to the walls of the abdominal cavity. This can create a whole set of problems, which I won't get into, but just knowing that this kind of work can also help with your organ health. Okay, it can also improve something called your thoracolumbar fascia. So this is a big piece of fascia, which you see in that photo to the right, that is shaped like a diamond. This piece of fascia is very, very often overlooked in the body, but is such an important area to be mindful of, to first know that it exists. A lot of folks, you've maybe seen a photo of the anatomy of the back, but has anyone really brought your attention to this diamond in the back? This is a huge communication network. It translates load, it translates tension, and I mean tension in a positive and a negative way, and it translates movement. Okay, so giving a little bit of love to that area can also be really helpful. Improving sensory awareness. So, you've also heard me talk about this in quite a few workshops now, of how the brain uses sensory input and sensory awareness to create and to generate a more efficient motor output. Basically, meaning the more information our body can take in sensory wise, touching, massaging, moving, being aware of on the inside and the outside of our body, the better our brain is going to be able to take that information and then create more efficient movement, pain free movement, more fluid movement, and on and on. Okay, and lastly, just pulling a little bit from the massage world into here, we've got our backs going all the way down our backs and the backs of our legs. In traditional Chinese medicine, is where your bladder meridian is located. So yes, it can affect your bladder, um, but there's also just a lot of energetics that go into the bladder channel. So if we can release this, and we have an inner and an outer bladder channel towards the midline and further away from the midline, if we can help release some of the tension that's being stored in this bladder meridian, we're going to release some defensive tension. This can be held in the body as stress and fear most commonly, and it allows the body, the energetic body, the physical body, for more openness to movement, to change, and to transformation. So, again, just another useful bit there. Okay. Okay, where even are my hips? This might sound silly. You're like, I know exactly where my hips are, but do you? Okay. So, your true hip joint, as circled in this photo, is where your thigh bone, your femur, connects into your pelvis. Most of us think of our hips as actually our waistline. So for example, when you put your hands on your hips, stand up a little bit, when you put your hands on your hips, we call these the hips. And well, they are, it's not a lie. But for the terminology that I'm going to be using, at least for this slide, and then when we do some of the self release techniques, when I'm talking about hips, I'm talking about your true hip joint. I make this mistake all the time. I interchangeably use hips to talk about both. It's not the most accurate, so I'm trying to be better about it. But just knowing that your true hip joint is actually quite a bit lower than what we think is the hips. This is our waistline. So where that red X is on the slide, that's your waistline. Okay, so why does this even matter? Uh, the short answer is posture. In some of my other workshops, and also a couple of Stephanie's workshops that she was teaching in 2020, God, I had to think about what year we were in. Um, we talk about, what does a seated upright posture look like? Okay, well, we don't want to be slumped back. We don't want the tail to be tucked under. We want your hips to be aligned. But what does it really mean for your hips to be aligned? So let me just stand for a sec here. Okay. So when we're talking hips, and I'm going to show you in a standing position, but I'm going to talk you through it in the seated. So again, this is where we maybe have historically thought of our hips. This is our waist. Our true hip joint, and if you're seated right now, I want you to come to a nice seated tall position. In fact, I'm going to grab my stool here. I want you to come to a nice seated tall position, and I want you to lift that tail as much as you can. And then I want you to take your fingers and slide them into your hip creases. You can even look down at your pants and be like, okay, where are my pants bunching up? Okay, this is my hip crease. For those of you that might be standing, you can do a mini squat or a mini sit to stand, and you're looking for the same thing. Where is that hip crease? Okay, so once you have found that hip crease in a seated or a standing position, I want you to move so that your hands are maybe about 3 inches from each other or so. And then I want you to move. Actually, let's pause right there. So you're in the hip crease. Your fingers, I'm going to change that. They're maybe about 4 inches away from each other. Okay, so I'm going to zoom into the camera. Right where my fingers are, deep, about 2 inches deep to my fingers, is where my femur attaches into my pelvis. Okay, so why is this important? When you're coming up into a seated posture or whatever kind of movement you're doing, if you think your hips are here, then maybe you're still slumped back, but you're like, oh, okay, well, my hips are upright. My hands are parallel with the floor. I must be doing this right. As opposed to knowing, actually, my hips are here and I need to lift my tail quite a bit more. Okay. So again, this is just for you and your movement education and your posture education of where are my hips and where do I want to be moving from? If we're doing spinal mobility, sure, I can cue myself from the waist. But if I'm talking about being stacked on top of your sit bones and having your hips in a 90-degree position, then we're moving from your true hip joint. Okay, so when we do some of those self-release techniques, we're going to be around that area. We're not going to be at the waistline. Okay, making sure I didn't miss anything there. Okay, so why do self-release for the hips? This is a big, like, if I can make flashing fireworks around this one bullet, I would. I mean, I probably can, but my tech skills are definitely not that good. Less compression is more connection. So again, my metaphor of when there's a traffic jam, can you take the back roads? Well, actually, hang on. I'm gonna walk that metaphor back. I'm gonna walk that metaphor back. Really, what I mean by this is when there's a traffic jam, what can we do to release the congestion? Is there a crash in the middle of the freeway that we need to clear to the side of the road so that traffic can be flowing a bit smoother? Okay, so what does this look like? For folks that are seated in a wheelchair all day, this, in very simple terms, just looks like changing that position, getting out of that position. It can be getting some tummy time, so getting on your belly, either on your bed or the floor, or it can mean getting some time on your back, again on the bed or the floor, and trying to open the hips up. And I'm going to talk about which areas are the most compressed when we're in a seated position. But if we can release some of the congestion in in those areas, if we can create more space, there's more room for nervous system connection and connective tissue connection to happen. Those cars can flow through, those nervous system signals can flow through, and the connective tissue can start to communicate with each other from your upper body and from the lower body. Oops. Okay, so I'm going to click through all of these. So what are when we're talking about, and this will again will be make a little bit more sense when we get down to the floor. With any movement you do or any position that you're in statically for a long period of time, for example, being seated in a wheelchair, we have lengthened structures in our body that basically are just permanently staying in that lengthened position. We have shortened structures and we have compressed structures. And oftentimes those shortened structures and compressed structures go hand in hand, but I just wanted to differentiate these for you. Okay, so lengthened structures are going to be your glutes and your back muscles. I have an asterisk by the back muscles because I'm assu- I'm assuming that if your tail is tucked under you, I'm going to come back to a seated position. If your tail is tucked under you, your low back is most likely lengthened, right? So this area is longer in a slumped position than it is if I'm in an upright position. Okay. And then obviously your glutes. Your glutes are, because we're in an upright seated position, our glutes are, they're compressed, right? We're sitting on them all day, but they're also in a lengthened position. A shortened position would be either lying flat on the ground or standing up. Okay, so the glutes are now in a more shortened position, more lengthened position. The technicalities of this just have to do where your muscles originate and insert. So if you're getting confused, I don't want you to worry too much about the why. You'd have to look at a full anatomy photo to see that. But just knowing, like, these are the structures that are compressed. How can I open these up? These are the structures that are lengthened. How can I activate these? And then these are the structures that are shortened. How can I lengthen them? Okay, so that's the approach I want you thinking about here. Shortened structures are going to be your hip flexors. Okay, so all of the muscles, I'll face you here, all of the muscles in through this area that help flex our hips. Our abdominals are also typically shortened. Again, this usually comes when the tail is tucked under us. Maybe the posture isn't perfect here. But abdominals connecting down into your pubic bone are often shortened. And likewise, your hamstrings, the muscles on the bottom of your legs are also shortened because they attach on to your calf here. Okay, so those are also considered shortened. Compressed structures, I'm going to get to the sacral nerve plexus in a minute, but your organs, when we're in again, I'm kind of assuming the seated position is a little slumped for this slide, but when we're slumped, we're compressing this whole area, all of your organs. We're compressing your diaphragm that sits at the top of the organs, and we're also compressing your pelvic floor at the bottom of the organs, which holds everything in. Okay, all of those areas are getting squished down and compressed. Your sacral nerve plexus is a bundle of nerves that runs through this area, and I'm going to show you this on that 3D app. And again, those are being compressed because we're seated on them. The tail is probably most likely, maybe, I'm going to assume tail is tucked under, and those nerves are getting squished and compressed. Okay. Oh, yes. Actually, is that great? Okay. Before I come into this, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to pop over to the anatomy app so you really get a good sense of this. Okay, great. So I'm just going to talk you through this here, and following my cursor will help with this. Okay, so let me zoom in. All right. So when we're talking about the true hip joint, we're talking about this area right here, where your thigh bone connects into your pelvis. The waist, where you have your hands when your hands are resting on that upper part, would be right around here. They're just sitting right at the top of the crest of your pelvis. This is called your iliac crest. I'm just going to show you the view in the back just so you can really get to see this more. You've got tailbone here. Here is your true hip joint. And then again, here is the top of your waist. Okay, I'm going to flip you back around to the front, and I am going to add some nerves. Okay, wow. So we've got this whole, let's see, what's the best angle? This whole area right here. So we have 4 nerve plexuses in the body. Plexus just meaning a bundle of nerves. We've got 2 in cervical, 1 in your lumbar vertebra in here, and then 1 in your sacral area. Okay. When you're in a seated position all day, again, especially when the tail is slightly tucked under you, it's this area here and these nerves here that get compressed. Okay. Your sacral nerves, this is important because if we're squishing and compressing those nerves all day, those nerves supply sensory and motor innervation to the back of your thigh, to most of your lower leg, to your entire foot, and also to parts of your pelvis. So if we're squishing that, we're more or less taking out the innervation, sensory and motor of the whole lower body. Okay, you might be thinking, well, I don't have sensation there, so why is this really important? Well, squishing anything in the body is never is never a good thing, whether or not the sensation is there or not. But if we can open up these areas, if we can decompress those nerves, what might the possibilities be? What connections might happen? What fluids might keep our lower body in a healthier state? Say if you get swelling in your in your ankles or lower legs, if there's like a temperature difference between the legs, if we can open this area up, again, what are the possibilities? Because if we're compressing these nerves, then we can't allow for anything to pass through. Okay, I'm going to take away the nerves. We're going to zoom out and we're just going to look at the back so that you see. Okay, and again, actually, let me just show you this right here. Let me layer on my organs. And by the way, we're looking at a female skeleton for the anatomy nerds out there. Okay, so these are your lungs. So the lungs are being protected by that rib cage. So when we do some work here, some self-release work, and we're hitting these areas, we're going to help release some of those little muscles in between the ribs, and it's hopefully going to allow for the lungs to breathe to a greater capacity, to access more volume and whatnot. Okay, going to take away the lungs. I'm going to start to layer on muscles. Let me zoom out a little bit. I just have to recenter this. Okay, so the muscles we're going to be targeting for this kind of self-release work that we're doing tonight. So let me just layer all of these. More so is going to be starting superficially, and depending how deep you get, everyone's going to get to different depth layers, depending on how supple your tissues are. So we've got your trapezius here, we've got your lats here on each side, and then you can see this really pretty triangle, which isn't even labeled in this anatomy app, shame on them, being your thoracolumbar fascia, that diamond that I was talking about earlier. I'm going to peel away a set of muscles. Oops. Okay. And then we get a little bit deeper. We get into more of these muscles that help bring the shoulder blades together. So some of those like chest opener muscles. We get some muscles around the shoulder blade. In through, this is a little deep to your lat, but in through here, all of these muscles that help control the movement of your shoulder blade. Okay, so we're going to be getting, and that's probably a little too deep. We probably won't get quite that deep. The rhomboids, and then some couple muscles up into the upper neck, but we're not going to focus on that today because that was in the prior workshop. Okay. Yes, and then actually let me take away one more. And then we're going to be working down, so that whole line of muscles you have going vertically from top to bottom, we call that your erector spinae group. We kind of clump them all together. We're going to be getting some good compressions into all of these muscles here. These help with breath, these help with back extension, and then deeper to that, actually, let me peel this away, sorry, one more time. And I'm just going to show you where your kidneys are. Okay, a little hard to see, but here's your kidney right here. when we look at where that sits on the low back, it's basically that bottom of the kidney is just sticking out right under the base of your lower ribs. So we want to be gentle in that area, but a really important area to give some compression and love to, so we can help with that organ health. And then if I layer on some of the intestines, you can see those here. Those sit more on the front of the body, okay? But it doesn't mean that we can't affect some of that from the back side of the body. Okay, awesome. Let me share the PowerPoint one more time. Sorry, I just have to reset this here. Okay. And then we'll jump into some release techniques. Okay, so we're gonna go through a body scan like we did last time. We're gonna do just a few movements just to kind of check in with the body. Make sure I'm exploding this. Okay. Oops, I move you all. So these check and recheck tools are really good ways to know, did the self-release work? Did I go too hard? Did I not go hard enough? Could I have gone longer? Should I go shorter next time? Can I breathe better? Can I rotate better? So doing this check and recheck can be really helpful in giving you more information for how you can tailor your self-release program specifically to you. It can change by the day, it can change by the month, but just being really dropped into that. I'm going to show you a couple of stretches. I'm going to show you a couple of back releases, and then we'll do a couple of hip releases. And actually, I'll probably also send you this slide, so you have this slide. You can take a photo of it now, but we'll be sending it to you. But really, it's those 3 points, 3 bullet points on the right-hand side. That's we're going to be focusing on. Okay. So let me exit out of here. Great. So I'm going to have you come, oh, and for those of you that are going to be participating tonight, just as a reminder, the couple things that you're going to need is a rolled up pair of socks, preferably like a thick pair of socks. These are hiking socks. If you don't have that, you can do a tennis ball, or if you have any other fancy release balls. This is a nice squishy one that I recommended and we linked out to in the first session. So this is also a good option. If you've got a bolster and or a half foam roller or a full foam roller, go ahead and grab that too. And then I'll have you start to make your way either down to the floor or to a bed space. Again, if you're just watching tonight, that's totally fine. But if you're moving around, now would be a good time to get into those positions. Okay, so let's just start with a body scan. So I'm just gonna have you take a moment, come to some kind of a grounded seated or standing position if you're not there yet. And then I'm just gonna have you close the eyes. And we're just gonna find a really simple scan today from your head to your toes. So just noticing how your jaw is feeling. Is there tension in that area? Does it feel free? How is the neck feeling today? How are the tops of the shoulders feeling right now? And as I walk you through each of these, you can give them a wiggle, just kind of noting how it's all feeling. How does your chest and your stomach feel? And then how does your back feel? The backs of your shoulders, your mid back, and then your low back. Are you able to feel your breath into your low back? Or is that kind of hard to sense? And then if you've got sensory awareness in the lower body, or even if you don't, just asking yourself, what might it feel like? So what might your hips feel like? Your sit bones, your upper legs? How do your knees feel right now? your lower legs, and your feet. Okay, so just taking a body inventory there. We'll take one more inhale, one more exhale, and we'll open the eyes. Okay. So let's start with a couple shoulder shrugs or shoulder circles. Just shrugging. Let me expand this so I can see you all. Just moving the shoulders up and down, and you're just noticing, sorry, I'm just getting my computer organized. Okay, and you're just noticing, okay, how do the backs of the shoulders feel, the tops of the shoulders? And then can I do a couple overhead arm raises? How's my shoulder mobility? How's my speed of movement? My ease of movement? Maybe one arm gets higher than the other. Okay, so you're just noticing all of these things. Good. And then let's do some thoracic rotation because this one is going to be super applicable for tonight. So we can either cross arms over the chest, or you can bring arms out in front of you, palms together. Excuse me, and you're just going to turn and rotate to your left and just noticing how far do I get? Is it hard to breathe when I'm in this rotated position? And then going the other way. Is it sticky? Can I rotate further in one direction than the other? And just go back and forth a couple times. You're just noticing. Oof, that side is sticky today. Okay. And then coming back to the center. If we have any standing athletes in the audience tonight, and you're able to do a sit to stand, or you're able to do a hip hinge, and I'll just briefly show you these. So doing a sit to stand from a chair or a squat, or doing a hip hinge, keeping that back and pelvis in a neutral position. Knees just keep a slight bend in them. Yeah, and again, just noticing, how does this feel in my body? How do my hips feel? How does my back feel? Okay, so you've got a good foundation there. You know how the body's feeling. Let me just make sure I'm not going to miss anything. So we're going to start with a stretch, and then we're going to move into some back work here. I'm going to have you start on your back, and then we'll flip onto your belly. So if you need to adjust for that, let me point my camera down. Okay, get this out of the way here. As I was saying earlier, one of the biggest things with self-release and opening things up is to change your body's position. This is a really, really awesome way to decompress the nerves, that sacral plexus that I was showing you, and the front of the hips. So right now I've got I'm using just a bolster, kind of like a yoga bolster. You can use pillows. You can also use a foam roller if that's what you've got. Really just anything that lifts your hips a little off the floor, opens them up, and then you'll notice I've got my legs in a froggy position. So the soles of my feet are just slightly touching each other, and I'm letting my knees naturally fall open. This might be challenging for some of you. You might need some assistance, either opening the knees, or on the other hand, if you're hypermobile, you might need some assistance, like a pillow. This is just a rolled up yoga mat. Maybe supporting my knee on one side if I'm scared that it's really going to open up and it's going to tweak my hips. Okay, so you can support yourself here as little or as much as you need to. And this is it. This is nice, right? You just get to be in this position. You get to open your hips up. You can do some stretches, reaching the arms overhead to lengthen the lats and lengthen some of the muscles that attach deeper, kind of deeper to the rib cage and to the hips. And if you really want to, you can start to straighten the legs out a little bit more. I don't recommend hanging out in this position for too long, because although it can be really nice to be in a fully lengthened position, it can also be a lot on the back. That's why the froggy legs is a little bit better because it supports the back, but it also still allows the front of the hips and the inside of the hips to really open up. Okay. Yeah, and I see a couple people doing that. That's great. I'm just going to keep moving through these. If you're really loving that position and you want to stay there, though, I fully support that. Okay, now coming into the main back releases. You know what? You can use your pair of socks. I'm going to use this tennis ball only because I've got dark clothes and my mat is dark, so I want you to be able to see it. If I'm being really honest, a tennis ball for me and my tissues, and also I'm a little sore today, is not going to feel great for me. So I would probably typically resort to my squishy pair of socks here. But so that you can see me, I'm going to use the tennis ball. Remember, the squishiness of the ball that you use is totally dependent on how supple your tissues are. Less is more here. Okay. So what we're basically doing, I'm going to show you actually in an upright position first, is we're going to walk this tennis ball all the way down the spine. So I'm going to be lying on the ground and I'm going to put it here. I'm going to move it a couple inches down. I'm going to put it here. I'm going to move it down, 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 down. When I get to that area where my kidneys are, right below the base of my ribs, I might switch to the pair of socks because that might not feel great for me. So you're going to move at your own pace with these and you're going to use what you need to use. When we get to the shoulder blade, I'm going to do a wide spot and then I'm going to work my way basically, and you can see this is the inside line of my shoulder blade, okay? So I'm going to take this ball and I'm going to I can't reach back there, but you get the point. I'm going to trace that ball all the way around the outline of my shoulder blade to help free up some of those muscles I just showed you on that app. Okay. So we can start high, and this is all I'm doing. The nice thing about these is you probably don't need much support. I'm going to keep my knees bent actually just because it gives me a little bit of leverage so I can show you what I'm doing. And if you're able to move the ball yourself, you can, or you can kind of do a wiggle to push yourself upwards, or you might need someone assisting you to move the ball down your back. But more or less, it's pretty easy to be placing that ball in different areas. And what I'm going to do is I'm just basically at the very top part of the shoulder blades, right in between my shoulder blade and my spine. And I'm just going to start by breathing and assessing that area. Is this a sticky area for me? What is it like if I do a snow angel? Oh, yeah, that's a little sticky, bringing my arm overhead. Maybe I go directly over my body and overhead, okay? So as we're doing these self-release, we want to bring movement into it if we can. It's not always appropriate. You don't always have to bring movement into it, but it can help get to different areas as we bring movement into it. And it can help release that exact movement. If I'm having a hard time going overhead, it might not be sticky here, but if I bring my arm overhead and right there it starts to get sticky, okay, that's a good place for me to hang out. I can even move my wrist around and then I can bring it back. Okay, so you have the freedom. You can do arms overhead, you could do snow angels, or you could do an arm coming across the body and opening up. Same thing. I'm just going to scoop my body a little up. Ooh, that is definitely a spot for me. So I'm basically like right in the, getting hard to breathe. Okay, so it's basically right in the center of my shoulder blades. And I'm going to do the same thing, bringing my arm up and over, across my body, and a snow angel. If it's something softer, I would be able to let my body sink into it more. So for example, if I've got the pair of socks, okay, I can really fully lay on that pair of socks. I still feel a good amount of compression, but it's not taking my breath away. It's not making my body do like a huh reaction, okay? But again, I'll stay with the tennis ball so you can all see what I'm doing. And I'm just gonna work my way down. So now maybe I'm at right at the base of my shoulder blades, and I'm gonna do the same thing. As you get lower, you can start to bring in more movement side to side with your ribs. I can peel myself off of the socks or off of the ball, and then I can lay myself back onto the ball. I can peel myself off. I can lay myself back on. This is really nice because for those of you that maybe saw my workshop on, let's see, I think it was called Getting Horizontal to Get Vertical. It was a floor-based routine. We did rolling, we did exercises on your back and exercises on your belly. You can start to combine some of those movements, okay, reaching across the body, coming onto the ball, reaching overhead, lifting your head up. Because remember, every time I change positions on this ball, whether it's through my back or my shoulders, I'm hitting a slightly different spot, a slightly different area. Sometimes it allows me to go deeper, sometimes I stay more superficial. So I encourage you to bring as much movement, even if it's just your head lifting up and down, you'll feel how the weight of your body shifts over that ball. For each 2-inch move of the ball I do down, I do, it doesn't have to be anything really intense. It could be 5 to 10 rolls. It could be 20 rolls. We talked about doing those X rolls in one of my other workshops. Okay, so that ball is like right in the middle of my low back right now, and I'm working on my X rolls, coming on and off of the ball. Compress, release, compress, release. Because our tissues work like a sponge. We squeeze them out, and then when we give them a break, the fluids rush back in. We squeeze, we compress, we release, the fluids rush back in, which is really nice when we're doing these active movements with release. It allows that pumping of the fluids to just naturally happen. Okay, so for time purposes, you would work your way all the way down. If we want to hit the shoulder, you're doing the same thing. Oops. You're doing the same thing, but you're just tracing the outline of that shoulder blade. Okay, so I'm gonna, instead of hugging my spine, and this might be hard to see on the video, but instead of hugging my spine, I'm now hugging that outline of my shoulder blade. Again, this is a little sticky for me, so my movements aren't gonna be quite as big, because I want you to see this with the tennis ball, and then I would move it a little bit lower. You could do circles. You could just do wrist movements. You could even prop your arm up on a pillow if it feels really intense for you, and you can just do wrist movements. And it's the same thing. Me doing wrist movements is changing, very subtly, changing the pressure that I have on the ball right now. Okay, and I would just kind of work my way around. I'm being lazy here, but working my way around the shoulder blade. One more shoulder movement I want to show you, which is a really important one, is doing some shoulder internal and external rotation. This one will be easier when the ball is closer to the base or the bottom of your shoulder blade. Okay, so holding there, doing a few internal, external rotations, again, reaching overhead, whatever movements you want to do there. When you hit a really sticky spot, I recommend doing one of two things. Either going to something softer and squishier, because remember, we don't want the body to have that reaction, and then breathing into it. Maybe you start with no movement. Maybe when you get in a really tender area, you just find a nice, slow, and deep breath, thinking of targeting your breath into that area until that tissue hopefully starts to release a little bit. Okay. So that's that whole, we're basically walking down your bladder meridian. That's that whole release there. And then working your way around the shoulder blade. And of course, you would be doing that on both sides. Turning onto our stomach. So again, what do we want to do? We're just trying to get into different positions here. We can open up the front of the hips, but likewise, if you're seated in a wheelchair all day, it's probably important to also open up the back of your hips, where your sacrum is, where the back of your pelvis is, and where that sacral plexus also comes out of your pelvis. So we basically just turn and flip over. And I know this looks really basic, but I've got the bolster here to hold my hips a little bit higher to basically open up this area, your SI joint area, which is the joint between your sacrum and your pelvis, and then your glutes, and really more importantly than your glutes, I should say, is that sacral plexus. Because remember, those are the structures that are getting compressed when you're seated all day. You can do things here as well. I recommend trying to stay off your phone, as tempting as that can be, especially in this position. But coming up onto your elbow, can we do some shoulder work here? This is from my shoulder workshop, where maybe we're doing a few sternum drops, dropping the sternum down and then pressing away. Maybe I'm doing more of a side to side movement, shifting left to right. Maybe I'm doing more of a head and neck. I can lay my forehead on my hands and I can work more on the strength of the muscles of the back of my neck and the deep muscles in the front of my neck. If you want to see some of those exercises, those are in my head, neck, and shoulders workshop. Okay. So you can layer on, and now we're actually we're not only opening up the back of the body that gets compressed all day, but we're activating it. This is a really important theme that you've been hearing me mention of, okay, it's okay to just breathe into something, but can we bring movement into it? Because when we release something, that's great. But if we go back to doing things how we were doing, the body's just going to resort to what it was doing before. If we can integrate movement right after we do the release, the body is going to take that release and then it's going to take that movement and it's going to integrate the two and it's going to create this more lasting and longer change for the body. And then over time, hopefully longer lasting change. Okay. One more thing here, and then I'll be done. I know I'm a couple minutes over. Is something called pons-based breathing. Okay, this is what's a good way to say this? This is a breathing technique, and I'm going to do a whole workshop on breathing, so this is just more of a teaser here. But this is a breathing technique to activate what we call extensor tone in our body. Okay, so what do I mean by this? Yeah, and well, let me just make sure I'm not missing any of these. Yes, great. Okay, just want to make sure that was the last one. So this pons-based breathing. So part of our brain, we have our brain stem, which is made of a few different components. But the middle component is called your pons. It's right about here-ish. When the pons is activated, it activates extensor tone in our body, meaning that with movement, all of our extension synergies, anything that we want to do with extension, whether it's looking up, neck extension, opening the chest, thoracic extension, or opening the hips, hip extension, or even pulling the shoulders back into shoulder extension, it's going to activate the system that engages that whole synergistic line, basically being extension. Okay, so what does this look like? The pons gets activated with deep inhalation. Okay, so a really good way to do this is we're focusing on a deep inhalation, and I want you to really exaggerate this inhalation, and we're going to do it in a side bend so that we're targeting one side of our body and then we're going to target the other side of our body. The neuroanatomy behind that, there's reasons why we do that for this one side of your brain controlling this side voluntarily and whatnot. But really the important part is just taking a deep inhalation into both sides. So you're going to take your left arm, you could do this from a seated position as well, and you're going to bring it out to the left side of your body as if you were pushing against something there. You're going to side bend to your right. Okay, so we're trying to open up that whole left side. And if it helps you, you can even put your hand on the side of the ribs. And I want you to take a big inhale into that area. And then a nice passive exhale. It can be through your mouth or your nose. Okay, and again, deep inhale, trying to fill up that whole side space, and then an easy exhale. Just do that one more time. Deep inhale, and a passive exhale. Good, and then coming back to the center and relaxing. Okay, so in a perfect world, we would have done some kind of a check and a recheck to see if that helps. But this breathing technique can be used to basically help find extension in the body. So at the end of the day, you transfer from your wheelchair to your bed or your wheelchair to your floor to do some movement, and your hips are feeling really tight. Like when you're lying on your back, your hips don't even want to settle down to the ground. Everything is feeling really tight. Just doing this breathing technique can actually help activate your extensors, which will help release the flexors. It will help release this tension in the front, and it will subtly, this isn't something like you're not going to be feeling a muscle activation. This is all more subtle nervous system based, but it helps stimulate that extensor tone to open up the front of the hips. Okay, so I put that pons-based breathing technique in the hip release section, because when we're talking about the front of the hips, that's what we want to be targeting. And I'm just realizing I did skip one exercise, so I'm just going to show you really quickly. I'm using this bigger orange ball for this one, just because the hips are a little bit bigger. So again, maybe you just did your bolster stretch where you were getting some tummy time on the bolster. You can then take a ball or a rolled up pair of socks of some sort, and I'm basically putting it in the area just below that true hip joint. Okay, so just below my hip crease, part of the ball is going to be right on that true hip joint, and I'm going to hang out here. I can use my upper body to find a weight shift with my hips back and forth. I can even take my arm on the same side and I can stretch it long, so I'm really opening up that whole left side of the body. And I can sit here and I can breathe, I can wiggle my ribs, I can wiggle my shoulders. Again, we're just trying to hit different areas of that whole hip flexor area that is typically in a shortened position when you're in a seated position all day. Okay. Did I forget anything? I don't think so. I think that's it. I feel like, oops. I feel like there's one thing I forgot, but it's not coming to my mind. But those are the main ones. Remember, less is more. Start with something soft and squishy, like a nice soft pair of socks. And if it feels like that's not doing anything, you can always upgrade to something a little bit harder. Listen to your body. Oh yeah, I was gonna do the check, recheck. Let's just do a couple of these. So just do a couple of shoulder shrugs. If you did these releases, just to see what your body's feeling now. Maybe a couple of overhead arm raises. Did this change for you? Your range of motion, your speed of movement, your ease of movement. And then lastly, maybe just some rotations, going from side to side. If you're a standing athlete, you can be doing your sit to stand or your hip hinge. See if that changed for you. Yeah, and just knowing that change. Again, we only did one side of the body and we were kind of moving through it quickly, but use these check and recheck-ins to see what worked for you, and then you can tweak your self-release protocol from there. Okay, I think that's it.
All right, Rachel, very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a few questions.
Yeah.
So this one is, All right, well, I'll give it a shot. This gentleman is asking that he has, or he's saying that he has MS lesions on his brainstem and his cervical spinal cord, and it causes spasticity, stiffness, and limited function in both legs. He can't lift his knees to walk, so he kind of cheats by using a frame walker. And he's asking kind of advice on exercises or sort of tricks to help him lift his knees or swing his legs a little bit more freely. It may not quite have anything to do with today's topics,
Mm.
but I promise him that I'll ask you this. So any
Yeah.
thoughts?
um,
So significant
yeah.
spasticity, stiffness, and limited function in both legs because of that, and he's not able to sort of lift his knees or swing his legs.
Yeah. I'm thinking. I would say what we covered today is definitely different than how I would answer that question. Um, that being said, I was talking about the breathing technique targeting the pons to target extensor tone. There's one breathing technique, and then there are some visual things that you can do that do the opposite and stimulate flexor tone. Um, yeah, that would be more specific and it would take longer for me to
Yeah.
answer, but there are tricks out there to get that flexor tone, flexor synergist areas working together. Um, I will say one thing. So it's a longer answer, and I would recommend whoever answered that question to reach out to me, book a session with me, and we can strategize over what might make sense for you.
Okay.
Um, but in general, if there's an area that you are wanting to move more, you're wanting to bring more awareness to, and we do this in one of my classes, is just simply this is the whole sensory awareness area. Before you walk, or you can do a test. Take 20 steps and then sit down. Take your hands, rub your hip flexors, wake that area up, bring some attention to that area. If you're having a hard time lifting your ankle up, frankly, I don't know if that's something you said, you can rub the top of your foot and you can rub your shin, but just bringing some awareness, shaking, vibration, touch to that area can actually make a bigger difference than most people would expect. So you could try that. That's just kind of like a quick answer, but I would say book with me if you're interested in trying out some other things.
Very good. Okay, next question. Wheelchair cushions are soft to avoid pressure sores, and yet it makes it hard not to sort of collapse into the pelvic bowls. Any idea for sitting more on top of the sit bones um, while in the chair?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll answer not that question, then I'll answer that question. I would say the first thing again is change positions as often as you can, change surfaces as often as you can. It doesn't just if you're able to. It doesn't just challenge how you're seated, but you being seated in a wheelchair versus you being seated on a squishy couch that kind of makes you use some of your abdominals and your core muscles versus being seated on a kitchen chair or some other hard surface is going to actually be really good for your nervous system and for your muscles and tissues. So my first answer would be get on different surfaces. Getting on harder surfaces is going to be much easier for you to lift into that tail lift and that nice seated tall position. If that's not an option for you, I encourage my clients to play with props. Um, one of the old studios I used to work at, we would take the shipping foam that we would get equipment in, and we would use that as props, whether it was under the ribs or under people's sit bones. So you don't have to go out and buy something fancy. Using a piece of foam, a rolled up towel, um, anything soft and squishy that you have in your house where, well, I shouldn't say soft and squishy. You can play with levels of soft and squishiness. There's also a really great, if you Google yoga wedge, And it's basically, people sometimes use it for their wrists when their wrists are down on the floor. It's like a triangular hard piece of foam that is brilliant, and I'll use this in the studio all the time. That is works really well in lifting the sit bones. You can create something like that out of foam or towels at your house, but just doing something where, especially if you have one of those bucket seats wheelchairs where you're kind of like really sunken back in, putting either a rolled up towel in your low back or putting something under your sit bones, again, being careful with pressure sores and that sort of thing, can be really helpful. But yeah, also try, and I should have mentioned this, trying one in the low back might also be a quick fix.
Okay, very good. Next question. This person does a lot of standing frame, and they want to know if there are any sort of different methods that they should be using while stood up in a standing frame for the hip flexion.
Yeah. I mean, first off, getting up in a standing frame is awesome because it's a different position and it's lengthening all of the shortened areas and it's shortening the lengthened areas and it's decompressing the compressed areas. So that alone is awesome. If you wanted to add on, this totally depends on the standing frame and your body in the standing frame, but if you wanted to add on some self-release techniques while you're in there, you know, like if you've got a strap, if you're standing and you've got a strap around your hips and you're able to like squish a ball inside of the strap, you could always do that. You know, I pulled this out and I forgot to mention it. It's not a huge thing, but the Theracane, for those of you that are unfamiliar, it's just like it's a hard piece of plastic, but it's nice because now this is really, really hard. You could always put a pair of socks over it if you needed something softer. When I use it on myself, I am barely putting any like basically the weight of the Theracane almost sometimes itself is enough if I'm just resting it on me. So if you're in a standing frame and you've got something like this and you've got some sticky and some tender areas, just taking that, and you can also do this in a seated position depending on your wheelchair, and you can do basically the same thing that I was doing on the floor, and you're just working your way down, working your way down. So yeah, that's another option if you're in a standing frame. But again, just being in the standing frame alone is a win.
Okay, very good. Next question. When lying on my back with bolster under me, my knees don't want to go to the sides. Is there something to help my hips open up or relax?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question because a lot of folks have really tight inner thighs. Taking a, okay, well, for lack of not digging through one of my closets right now, if you have like, it could even be a blow up beach ball, but any kind of a soccer ball, whatever, a basketball, whatever it is, to sticking it between your legs. This is just a rolled up yoga mat. Just to give you a little bit more space, you could do a big pillow. So if your legs are really tight and your knees are squishing in, you can slowly over time put more pillows in between your knees, get a bigger ball, put it in between your knees. Yeah, that'll help slowly open the thighs up a little bit.
Okay. Next question. What are the best things to do if you have significant hip contracture on one side?
Yeah. Yeah, I used to have a client like this. I would emphasize the nervous person, the nervous system for that person. So I would really focus on calming the nervous system before even getting into these positions and doing the pons-based breathing. Instead of doing we only did 3 repetitions today, doing like 5 to 10 repetitions. And you can come up in between each one, take a little bit of break, go into the next one, and then do it on both sides. And just seeing if addressing that more through the nervous system is more effective than lying the body out or stretching the body or doing anything like that. I will say with that kind of stuff too, getting some rocking into the body can be another really great way to get the nervous system more in the state that we want to do. So you can have somebody, making sure it still is light enough, you can have someone pushing on your feet. I'm going to show you, because there's only one of me, I'm just going to show you what this would look like if someone weren't pushing on the feet. But if you need someone pushing on your feet, they would just be taking your feet and you're just letting that vibration and that rocking sensation roll through your body. If that is also hard, you could really get that sensation anyway. If your knees need to be bent or whatever it is, you can put that vibration and that shake through the body in whatever way. But that's another good trick. It kind of speaks more to like the motor development stages of a baby, and why that rocking and shaking can be really helpful in releasing and relaxing things. So give that a shot.
Okay. Next question. Would switching to a different chair for meals be good? Not sure what that.
Did you say for meals?
No, for meals and like eating.
Oh, yeah, yeah. That actually would be really good. Again, it's just a different surface. So if you're able to, and you're in your wheelchair, and you can safely transfer to a kitchen chair, eat your meal, and then transfer back, absolutely. It's a different surface for your body. It will make you work in different ways, and yes, yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay. Alrighty. Those are all the questions that we've had tonight.
Awesome.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you everyone for tuning in. Again, tonight's presentation was made possible thanks to the generosity of our donors who are going to be supporting all of our virtual programs for an indefinite basis. Thanks again, Rachel. We are going to have the recording of this workshop in your inboxes tomorrow, and as Rachel mentioned, there's going to be that one slide that she's going to provide me with, so I'll be sure to include that in. And also there were a couple of sort of equipment that she showed that which she actually sort of used at in the last one too, right, Rachel? The ball, and then so we'll be sure to put the link for those of you that missed that. And we'll also include the link to the last presentation, which had more to do with upper extremities, sort of shoulder, chest, neck area. That way you'll get sort of the whole ball of wax. So that's it, right?
Yep.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Stay cool. Thanks for joining us tonight. Have a great rest of the week and a great weekend, too.
Okay, awesome.
Okay.
Thanks again. It's good to see you all. Have a good
All right.
one.
Bye, Rachel.
Bye.